In a quiet suburban neighborhood, life seemed peaceful for most residents. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and cheerful mailboxes that greeted passers-by like old friends. Among the houses stood a modest home where two sisters, Emma and Lily, lived together. Their house wasn't the fanciest on the block, but it radiated warmth and love, qualities that reflected the bond between the siblings. Emma, the older sister, was fiercely protective of Lily. She had always been her little sister's biggest supporter, advocate, and friend. Lily, who was born with cerebral palsy, used a wheelchair to get around. Despite the challenges she faced daily, Lily had an infectious laugh and a heart full of kindness. Together, the sisters navigated life in their own unique way, finding joy even in the simplest moments. But despite their close relationship, they weren't immune to the troubles that sometimes brewed in small communities like theirs. The trouble began when the Homeowners Association, HOA, started taking notice of their property. At first, it was minor complaints about things like overgrown hedges or mismatched paint colors. These nitpicky rules were typical of HOAs, which often enforced strict guidelines to maintain uniformity across neighborhoods. However, Emma and Lily didn't think much of it. They figured if they addressed the issues promptly, everything would blow over. But then came the bigger problem: Lily's wheelchair ramp. It had been installed years ago to make their home more accessible, allowing Lily to come and go freely without needing constant assistance. To Emma and Lily, the ramp was essential, a lifeline that gave them independence. Unfortunately, some members of the HOA saw it differently. They claimed the metal structure clashed with the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. Letters arrived in the mail, politely worded but firm, demanding its removal. Emma tried reasoning with the HOA board, explaining how vital the ramp was for Lily's mobility. She even offered to repaint it or add decorative elements to blend it better with the surroundings. But no matter what compromise she proposed, the board remained unmoved. One particular member, known as Karen, became especially vocal about the issue. Karen prided herself on being the unofficial enforcer of the HOA's rules, often patrolling the streets to ensure everyone complied with the guidelines. Her attitude rubbed many neighbors the wrong way, but few dared to challenge. Her one sunny Saturday afternoon, Emma and Lily decided to host a small family barbecue in their backyard. The weather was perfect: clear skies, a gentle breeze, and birds chirping happily in the trees. Friends and relatives gathered to enjoy good food, laughter, and each other's company. For once, Emma felt like they could relax and forget about the looming tension with the HOA, that is, until Karen showed up uninvited. She marched onto their lawn, her high heels clicking against the pavement, carrying a clipboard as though she were conducting an official inspection. Her face was set in a scowl, and her voice carried across the yard loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've ignored our requests long enough," she barked at Emma. "This ramp has got to go. It's ruining the look of the entire neighborhood." Emma sighed, setting down the plate of burgers she'd been holding. She walked over to Karen, keeping her tone calm and measured. "I understand your concerns," she said, "but this ramp is necessary for my sister. We've already discussed possible compromises." "I don't care about compromises," Karen interrupted sharply. "Rules are rules. If you won't remove it voluntarily, we'll have no choice but to take legal action." By now, the guests had stopped talking and turned their attention to the heated exchange. Lily, sitting nearby in her wheelchair, looked uncomfortable, but tried to stay out of the argument. Emma placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before turning back to Karen. "Legal action? Over a wheelchair ramp? Really?" Karen crossed her arms, her expression smug. "Don't test me. I'm serious about this." For a moment, Emma considered walking away. Arguing wouldn't solve anything, and she didn't want to ruin the day for her guests. But just as she opened her mouth to respond, Karen did something unexpected and shocking. In a fit of frustration, Karen shoved Lily's wheelchair, causing it to roll backward slightly. Lily gasped, gripping the armrests tightly as she struggled to regain balance. The sudden movement startled everyone, including Karen herself, who froze for a split second before realizing what she'd done. Emma's blood boiled. She rushed to Lily's side, making sure she was okay. Thankfully, Lily hadn't been injured, but the incident left her visibly shaken. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Why would she do that?" Emma's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. She helped Lily back into the house while calling the police to report the assault. As the authorities arrived and took statements from witnesses, Karen stammered excuses, claiming she hadn't meant to hurt anyone. But the damage was done. What had started as a petty disagreement over a ramp had escalated into something far more serious. Over the next few days, news of the incident spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some residents sided with Karen, believing her version of events and dismissing Emma's accusations as exaggerations. Others sympathized with Emma and Lily, appalled by Karen's behavior. Tensions ran high, dividing the community further. Determined to seek justice, Emma filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. However, her efforts yielded little progress. The board dismissed her concerns, siding with Karen and urging her to comply with their demands. Frustrated but undeterred, Emma realized she needed to take matters into her own hands. Little did anyone know, she had a secret weapon, one that would change the course of the conflict forever. Years earlier, Emma had quietly pursued a law degree, at night while juggling her job as a paralegal and caring for Lily. She had dreamed of becoming a lawyer but put those aspirations on hold to focus on her family. Now, armed with legal knowledge and a burning desire to protect her sister, Emma prepared to fight back, not just for herself and Lily, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless against injustice. What happened next would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. The days following the incident were a whirlwind of emotions for Emma and Lily. While Lily tried to focus on her daily routine, she couldn't shake off the memory of Karen's outburst or the way her wheelchair had been shoved so carelessly. It wasn't just about the physical act itself. It was the humiliation, the sense that someone thought her needs didn't matter. Emma noticed how quiet Lily had become, retreating into herself more than usual. She saw the sadness in her sister's eyes and felt a deep pang of guilt for not being able to shield her from such cruelty. Emma knew she had to act, but she also understood that this wasn't just about one person or one moment. This was bigger than Karen. It was about standing up against intolerance and ensuring that people like Lily weren't treated as second-class citizens. The HOA's refusal to address the issue only fueled her determination. Every letter they sent demanding the removal of the ramp felt like another slap in the face, another reminder that some people simply didn't understand, or worse, didn't care, about what accessibility meant for individuals with disabilities. Determined to fight back, Emma began researching her options. Her background as a paralegal gave her a solid foundation in legal matters, but she wanted to dig deeper. Late at night, after tucking Lily into bed, Emma would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by books and documents. She studied case law, related to disability rights, reviewed local ordinances, and even reached out to advocacy groups for advice. One organization, dedicated to supporting families affected by cerebral palsy, provided invaluable guidance. They connected her with lawyers who specialized in discrimination cases and shared stories of others who had faced similar battles. As Emma dove deeper into her research, something unexpected happened. Memories of her own dreams resurfaced. Years ago, before life demanded all her energy be poured into caring for Lily, Emma had dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She had enrolled in night classes while working full-time, determined to carve out a future where she could make a difference. But when their parents passed away unexpectedly, leaving Emma as Lily's sole guardian, those aspirations took a back seat. Now, sitting amidst stacks of legal briefs and court decisions, Emma realized that maybe fate was giving her a second chance to use her knowledge, not just for herself, but for her sister. With newfound clarity, Emma decided to take legal action. She drafted a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA, citing violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and other relevant laws. The document outlined not only the physical altercation, but also the discriminatory practices that had led to the conflict. Emma made sure to include evidence, photographs of the ramp, copies of the HOA's letters and witness statements from neighbors who had seen Karen's behavior firsthand. She poured her heart into every word, determined to present a case that no one could ignore. When the complaint was filed, Emma expected pushback, but nothing could have prepared her for the storm that followed. Word of the lawsuit spread quickly through the neighborhood, igniting debates among residents. Some supported Emma, praising her courage and calling for accountability. Others sided with Karen, dismissing the lawsuit as an overreaction. A few even accused Emma of using her legal background to manipulate the system, claiming she was too emotional to see reason. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down on her stance. She held impromptu meetings with sympathetic neighbors, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive attack. "I'm just trying to protect our property values," she told anyone who would listen. "Emma's making this personal because she can't accept criticism." Her words carried weight with some, especially those who already harbored resentment toward the sisters for disrupting the neighborhood's harmony. Despite the backlash, Emma refused to back down. She spent hours preparing for the upcoming hearing, rehearsing arguments and anticipating counterpoints. On weekends, she practiced presenting her case in front of a mirror, perfecting her tone and delivery. At night, she confided in Lily, sharing updates and seeking reassurance. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked one evening, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Lily smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. "You've always done what's best for me," she replied. "If anyone deserves justice, it's us." Her words gave Emma strength, reminding her why she had started this fight in the first place. Still, there was one secret Emma hadn't shared. Not with Lily, not with anyone. When she filed the lawsuit, she included a special request. Given her expertise in legal matters, she asked to serve as the presiding judge for the case. It was a bold move, one that required approval from higher courts. But Emma believed it was necessary. She wanted to ensure fairness, to prove that justice could prevail even when personal stakes were involved. Weeks passed, and finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Emma dressed carefully, choosing a professional yet approachable outfit. She helped Lily into her wheelchair, making sure she was comfortable before heading to the courthouse. As they walked through the doors, whispers filled the air. Neighbors craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the sisters, curiosity mingling with judgment. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Karen sat stiffly beside her lawyer, clutching a folder filled with notes. Her expression was confident, almost smug, as though she already knew how the case would end. Emma and Lily took their seats, waiting patiently for the proceedings to begin. Just as the bailiff called for everyone to rise, he announced something that sent shockwaves through the room. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Emma Thompson." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then gasps erupted, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Karen's jaw dropped, her confidence crumbling as she stared at the woman now seated behind the bench. Emma met her gaze steadily, her expression calm but resolute. She had kept her role as judge a secret until now, knowing it would add an element of surprise and perhaps unsettle those who underestimated her. As Judge Emma opened the session, she addressed the court with poise and authority. "This case is about more than a ramp," she began, her voice steady. "It's about respect, inclusion, and the rights of individuals with disabilities to live without fear of discrimination. I will hear all evidence impartially and render a decision based solely on the facts presented." Her opening statement set the tone for the rest of the hearing. Witnesses were called, testimonies were given, and pieces of evidence were scrutinized. Throughout it all, Emma maintained her composure, asking pointed questions and challenging inconsistencies in the defense's arguments. Her years of studying law paid off, allowing her to navigate complex legal terrain with ease. Karen struggled, under the pressure. Her initial bravado faded as Emma dismantled her claims one by one. Security footage from the day of the incident was played, showing clearly how Karen had shoved Lily's wheelchair. Neighbors who had previously stayed silent came forward, describing Karen's history of bullying behavior and intimidation tactics. Even her own lawyer seemed rattled, struggling to mount a coherent defense. By the time recess was called, Karen looked pale and shaken. She slumped in her seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. For the first time, she seemed to grasp the gravity of her actions and the consequences they might bring. Outside the courtroom, whispers continued to swirl. Some residents marveled at Emma's transformation from plaintiff to judge, applauding her courage and intelligence. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether her dual role compromised the integrity of the trial. But regardless of opinions, one thing was clear: the tide was turning. What had started as a minor dispute over a wheelchair ramp had evolved into a pivotal moment for the entire community, a reckoning that would force everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice, privilege, and the power of standing up for what's right. And as Emma returned to the bench after the break, ready to deliver her verdict, she knew this was more than just a legal battle. It was a chance to create lasting change. For Lily, for herself, and for anyone who deserved to live in a world that valued equality above all else. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone returned from recess. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how the drama would unfold. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, while cameras clicked, softly in the background, capturing every detail of this unprecedented moment. At the center of it all was Emma, seated behind the judge's bench, her presence commanding yet composed. She had spent years dreaming of serving on the bench, but never could she have imagined her first official case would be so deeply personal. Karen, on the other hand, looked like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the confident woman who had marched onto Emma and Lily's lawn, clipboard in hand, ready to enforce HOA rules at any cost. Now she sat slumped beside her lawyer, her face pale and drawn. Every time Emma asked a question or addressed the court, Karen flinched slightly, as though bracing for another blow. Her earlier bravado had crumbled under the weight of accountability, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Emma wasted no time getting back to business. "Let us proceed," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. The first witness called to the stand was none other than Lily herself. Emma hesitated briefly before asking her sister to testify. She knew how difficult it must have been for Lily to relive that day. But Lily nodded resolutely when Emma asked if she felt up to it. With Emma's help, Lily wheeled herself to the witness stand, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. "Can you tell the court what happened on the afternoon of the incident?" Emma asked gently, softening her tone to make Lily feel more comfortable. Lily took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "We were having a barbecue, just a small family gathering. Everyone was happy. Then Karen came onto our property and started yelling about the ramp. She said we needed to remove it because it didn't look nice." Lily paused, glancing toward Karen before continuing. "I tried not to pay attention, but then she pushed my wheelchair. I almost fell out." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even those who had doubted Emma's claims couldn't deny the raw emotion in Lily's voice. Tears welled up in her eyes as she recounted the fear and humiliation she had felt in that moment. Emma reached for a tissue and handed it to her sister, offering a reassuring smile. "Thank you for sharing your experience, Lily," Emma said softly. "You may step down now." As Lily returned to her seat, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The jury, and even some of the spectators, seemed visibly moved by her testimony. Karen stared at her lap, avoiding eye contact with anyone. For the first time, she appeared genuinely remorseful, though whether it stemmed from guilt or fear of consequences remained unclear. Next, Emma turned her attention to the evidence. Security footage from a neighbor's camera had captured the entire incident, providing undeniable proof of Karen's actions. The video played on a large screen in the courtroom, showing Karen storming onto the lawn, gesturing wildly, and then shoving Lily's wheelchair with clear intent. The clip ended with Emma rushing to her sister's side, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. "This footage speaks for itself," Emma stated, addressing both the prosecution and defense. It confirms not only the physical altercation but also the aggressive behavior displayed by Ms. Karen throughout the encounter. Karen's lawyer attempted to downplay the significance of the video, arguing that his client had simply been frustrated and hadn't meant to cause harm. Ms. Karen has always been passionate about maintaining neighborhood standards, he argued. Her actions, while perhaps misguided, were not malicious. Emma raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. Passion does not excuse assault, she replied coolly, nor does it justify discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Let me remind the court that the Americans with Disabilities Act exists to protect people like my sister, people who deserve equal access and respect. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly struggling to counter Emma's logic. Sensing weakness, Emma pressed further. She introduced additional witnesses, including neighbors who had grown tired of Karen's bullying tactics. One elderly man recounted how Karen had once threatened to fine him for planting flowers that didn't match her preferred color scheme. Another woman described being scolded for allowing her children to play outside without supervision, despite there being no rule against it. Each testimony painted a clearer picture of Karen's pattern of behavior: controlling, entitled, and dismissive of others' needs. By the time the final witness stepped down, the tide had turned decisively against her. Even her own supporters in the gallery seemed uneasy, exchanging furtive glances and whispering among themselves. During a brief break, Lily approached Karen in the hallway. Despite everything, she carried no trace of anger or bitterness. Instead, her expression was one of quiet compassion. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me," she said softly, stopping her wheelchair a few feet away. "Maybe we can find a way to fix this together." For a moment, Karen stood frozen, staring at Lily as though seeing her for the first time. Then tears began streaming down her face. She sank onto a nearby bench, burying her head in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I didn't realize, I didn't think—" Lily waited patiently, giving Karen space to process her emotions. When the crying subsided, Karen looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with genuine regret. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been selfish and cruel. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but all I did was make things worse." Back inside the courtroom, Karen surprised everyone by taking the stand. Voluntarily, her lawyer protested, but Karen insisted on speaking directly to the judge and to Emma. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaky but sincere, "I want to apologize, not just to you and your sister, but to everyone I've hurt with my actions. I was wrong to shove Lily's wheelchair. I was wrong to demand the removal of something so important to her independence, and I was wrong to prioritize aesthetics over human dignity." Emma listened intently, her expression neutral. While Karen's apology was heartfelt, Emma knew words alone weren't enough to undo the damage. True justice required accountability and meaningful change. When it was time for closing arguments, Emma delivered hers with precision and conviction. "This case is not about revenge," she emphasized, looking directly at Karen. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what my sister and I have faced. It's about holding ourselves accountable for fostering communities where everyone feels valued and included." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Ms. Karen's actions were unacceptable, but they also present an opportunity for growth, reflection, and transformation. Let this trial serve as a reminder that laws exist not to punish but to protect. That accessibility is not a burden, but a right, and that kindness costs nothing, yet its impact can last a lifetime. As Emma concluded her remarks, the courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing, captivated by the gravity of her message. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the windows. It was a fitting backdrop for a day that marked the beginning of something new, not just for Emma and Lily, but for the entire neighborhood. When the proceedings adjourned for the day, Emma wheeled Lily out of the courthouse, their heads held high. They didn't know yet what the verdict would be, but they already felt a sense of victory. Justice wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sparking conversations, challenging prejudices, and paving the way for a better future. And as they walked, or rolled, away from the courthouse, they knew they had done exactly that. The next morning, the courtroom was packed once again. Word had spread quickly about Karen's emotional breakdown and public apology, drawing even more attention to the case. Reporters jostled for space in the gallery, their cameras clicking incessantly as Emma took her seat behind the bench. Neighbors who had initially dismissed the lawsuit now filled the rows, whispering among themselves about what might happen next. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mix of curiosity and unease. Emma opened the session with the same calm authority she had displayed throughout the trial. She reviewed the key points of the case, summarizing the evidence presented and the testimonies given. Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable intensity in her eyes, a reflection of the years of frustration, love, and determination that had brought her here. "This court has heard from multiple witnesses," she began, addressing both the prosecution and defense. "We have seen video footage, read statements, and listened to personal accounts. It is now time to render a verdict based on the facts." Karen sat stiffly beside her lawyer, her earlier confidence completely shattered. She glanced nervously at Emma, then quickly looked away, unable to meet the judge's gaze. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue, twisting it into a tight knot. For the first time, she seemed fully aware of the gravity of her actions and the consequences they might bring. Emma turned her attention to the jury, reminding them of their duty to remain impartial. "Your decision must be guided by the law and the evidence presented," she said firmly. "Emotions may run high, but justice demands clarity and fairness." With that, she instructed the jury to deliberate. As the jury filed out of the room, the tension in the courtroom became almost unbearable. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by nervous coughs and restless shifting in seats. Emma remained composed, her expression unreadable as she reviewed her notes. Lily, seated nearby, fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, clearly anxious about the outcome. Despite the overwhelming support they had received, the uncertainty still weighed heavily on both sisters. Hours passed before the jury returned, their faces giving nothing away. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, the room fell utterly silent. "We find the defendant, Ms. Karen, guilty of assault," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief and approval. Karen slumped in her seat, tears streaming down her face as the reality of the verdict sank in. Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing the jury's decision before turning to address the court. "Ms. Karen," she began, her tone measured but firm, "you have been found guilty of physically assaulting my sister Lily and violating her rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. This court takes such offenses very seriously." She paused, letting her words resonate before continuing. "In light of the evidence and testimony presented, I hereby order the following. First, Ms. Karen will pay restitution to cover the emotional distress caused to Lily. Second, she is required to attend sensitivity training focused on disability awareness and inclusivity. Third, she must complete 100 hours of community service dedicated to improving accessibility within our neighborhood. Finally, the Homeowners Association is mandated to revise its policies to ensure compliance with federal disability laws, including the permanent allowance of accessibility features like wheelchair ramps." The courtroom erupted into murmurs as people processed the ruling. Some cheered quietly while others exchanged concerned glances. Karen's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear, but she barely reacted. Instead, she stared straight ahead, her shoulders slumped in defeat. After dismissing the court, Emma stepped down from the bench and joined Lily, who was waiting patiently near the exit. "It's over," Emma said softly, placing a hand on her sister's shoulder. "We did it." Lily smiled weakly, though her eyes still held traces of sadness. "Do you think she'll change?" she asked, glancing toward Karen, who was being escorted out by her lawyer. "I hope so," Emma replied thoughtfully. "But real change doesn't happen overnight. What matters is that we stood up for ourselves, and for everyone else who deserves to live without fear of discrimination. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, eager to capture their reactions. Microphones were thrust forward and cameras flashed as questions flew from all directions. "Judge Thompson, how does it feel to preside over your own case?" one reporter asked. Another chimed in, "Did you ever imagine this would happen when you started studying law?" Emma raised a hand to quiet the chaos, her demeanor calm but commanding. "This case wasn't about me or my role as a judge," she said, her voice carrying over the din. "It was about standing up for what's right, for my sister, for our community, and for anyone who has ever felt marginalized because of their differences. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about creating a better future for everyone." Her response drew applause from some onlookers, while others nodded in agreement. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma and Lily made their way to their car, exhausted but relieved. They drove home in silence, each lost in their thoughts. For Emma, the victory felt bittersweet. While she was proud of what they had accomplished, she couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different, if Karen had chosen empathy over hostility from the start. Back at their house, the sisters settled onto the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The evening air was cool and peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. Lily broke the silence first. "Do you think people will actually listen now?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope. Emma sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Actually, I think some will," she replied honestly. "Others might need more time. But the important thing is that we've started a conversation, one that can't be ignored anymore." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. When Emma opened it, she found Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor who had testified during the trial. In her hands, she held a bouquet of wildflowers. "These are for you too," she said warmly, handing them over. "You've inspired all of us to do better, to be better." Touched by the gesture, Emma thanked her and invited her to sit for a while. Over tea, Mrs. Henderson shared how the trial had opened her eyes to the challenges faced by individuals with disabilities. "I never realized how much work needs to be done," she admitted. "But I'm ready to help however I can." By the end of the evening, several other neighbors had stopped by, offering similar sentiments. Some promised to volunteer for accessibility projects, while others pledged to speak up against injustice whenever they encountered it. The outpouring of support was unexpected but deeply appreciated, signaling a shift in the community's mindset. As the night wore on, Emma reflected on everything that had transpired. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be resistance, ignorance, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that their fight had sparked meaningful change. Hopeful that Lily could live without constantly having to defend her place in the world, and hopeful that together they could continue building a future where kindness and understanding triumphed over prejudice. When the last visitor left and the house grew quiet, Emma turned to Lily with a small smile. "We've come a long way," she said softly, "and we're just getting started." The days following the trial brought a strange mix of emotions for Emma and Lily. On one hand, there was a sense of relief. Finally, justice had been served, and their voices had been heard. On the other hand, the weight of everything they had endured lingered like a shadow. The neighborhood buzzed with conversations about the case, some supportive, others skeptical, but all centered around the undeniable impact it had made. For Emma and Lily, life didn't immediately return to normal. Instead, it felt as though they were standing at the edge of something new, a chance to rebuild not just their own lives but also the community around them. Karen, meanwhile, seemed almost unrecognizable. Gone was the brash, self-assured woman who once strutted through the streets enforcing HOA rules. In her place was someone quieter, more subdued, carrying herself with an air of humility that no one had seen before. True to the court's ruling, Karen began attending sensitivity training sessions twice a week. At first, she approached these meetings reluctantly, sitting stiffly in her chair and avoiding eye contact with the instructor. But as the weeks went on, something shifted. She started listening, not just hearing, but truly absorbing what was being said. One afternoon, during a session focused on understanding the daily challenges faced by individuals with disabilities, Karen broke down in tears. The instructor had shared videos of people navigating inaccessible environments, struggling to enter buildings without ramps, being turned away from restaurants because of service animals, or simply trying to live ordinary lives while facing extraordinary barriers. Watching those stories hit Karen hard. She realized how much privilege she had taken for granted and how little she had understood about the struggles of others. After the session ended, Karen approached the instructor hesitantly. I need to do more," she stammered, her voice trembling. "This isn't just about checking a box or fulfilling my hours. I want to make amends, to really change." The instructor smiled warmly, clearly pleased by her determination. "That's a great first step," she said. "Start small. Maybe volunteer somewhere that aligns with your goals, or reach out to someone directly affected and ask how you can help. Genuine effort goes a long way." Encouraged by this advice, Karen decided to take action. Her first move was unexpected yet deeply meaningful. She visited Emma and Lily's home. When Emma opened the door, she was momentarily stunned to see Karen standing there, holding a basket filled with homemade cookies. "Can we talk?" Karen asked softly, her eyes filled with sincerity. Emma hesitated, unsure whether to let her in, but Lily, seated nearby, gave her sister an encouraging nod. Reluctantly, Emma stepped aside, allowing Karen to enter. They sat together in the living room, the atmosphere tense but charged with possibility. "I know I can't undo what I've done," Karen began, her voice cracking slightly. "But I want you both to know how sorry I am for shoving Lily's wheelchair, for dismissing your needs, for everything. I was wrong, and I'm so ashamed of myself." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I've started learning about accessibility and disability rights, and it's opened my eyes to so much. I never realized how unfair things are, or how much work still needs to be done." Lily listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When Karen finished speaking, she spoke up gently. "Thank you for apologizing," she said. "It means a lot, but words aren't enough. What matters is what you do next." Karen nodded earnestly. "I understand," she replied. "That's why I'm here, to show you that I'm serious about changing. I'd like to start by helping improve accessibility in the neighborhood. If you're willing, maybe you could guide me? Teach me what works and what doesn't?" Emma exchanged a glance with Lily, surprised by Karen's willingness to learn. After a moment, she responded cautiously. "We'll see," she said. "Change takes time, and trust has to be earned. But if you're sincere, then yes, we'll help you." Over the next few weeks, Karen threw herself into her community service requirement with surprising enthusiasm. She organized workshops to educate neighbors about disability rights, worked alongside volunteers to install ramps and widen pathways, and even partnered with local advocacy groups to host fundraisers for accessibility projects. Slowly but surely, her efforts began to win over skeptics. People who had once dismissed her as arrogant now saw glimpses of genuine remorse and growth. Meanwhile, Emma and Lily found themselves becoming unofficial leaders in the movement to create a more inclusive community. Neighbors frequently sought their input on design plans, asking questions like, "Is this ramp wide enough?" Or, "Would this feature make things easier for someone with mobility issues?" Their expertise, born out of lived experience, became invaluable. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, Emma and Lily joined a group of residents gathered near the entrance of the subdivision. A plaque had been unveiled earlier that day, dedicated to Lily's courage and resilience. Inscribed on it were the words, "In honor of Lily Thompson, whose strength inspired us to build a more accessible and compassionate community." As they stood there, surrounded by friends and neighbors, Emma felt a swell of pride, not just for herself or Lily, but for everyone who had come together to make a difference. Even Karen was present, standing off to the side with a quiet smile. Though she still had much to learn, her transformation was undeniable. Later that night, as Emma and Lily sat on their porch reflecting on the day's events, Lily turned to her sister with a soft smile. "Do you remember when we thought this neighborhood would never accept us?" she asked. Emma chuckled softly. "How could I forget? Those early days were tough. But look at us now," Lily continued. "We've changed things, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else too. That feels amazing." Emma reached over, squeezing her sister's hand. "Yeah, it does," she agreed. "And we're not done yet. There's always more work to be done." For the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to feel hopeful, not just about their future, but about the world around them. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they had proven that change was possible. Together, they had turned adversity into opportunity, transforming pain into purpose. And as they watched the stars twinkle above, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next, with courage, determination, and unwavering love for each other.